that's the beauty of fighting as well. I think it's very granular and it's easy to figure out, and people can resonate to it. Whether you like it or not, you can figure out usually what's going on and who's winning. So it makes it very easy to digest.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the FIO podcast, the podcast where we break down the stigma that everyone has it figured out but you. So let's figure it out together. Today, we have Dr. Duncan French.
What's going on? Mad Dog and the Ginger Ninja.
That's a good nickname.
Yeah.
Duncan, thank you for being here with us today. I know this is our second time meeting, but I feel like I actually know you pretty well.
Oh, that's very nice. Yeah. That's very nice. At least I make you feel comfortable in my presence.
Warm and fuzzy. Duncan, you are a man of many hats, but do you want to tell us a little bit about what your role here is at the UFC?
Yeah, so I'm the what's called the Vice President of Performance. I basically manage and direct the Performance Institute, which is the high-performance service arm of the greater UFC as we know it. And the Performance Institute provides infrastructure and services to our global roster of fighters, everything from sports medicine to nutrition to strength and conditioning, psychology, all the different aspects of service provision outside of technical and tactical training. So yeah, I've got the pleasure and the joy of supporting and managing the team here in Las Vegas, and we also have another facility in Shanghai, China. We're opening another one in Mexico City next year, so it's exciting times.
Wow. I forgot to say that we do have the Luke Lewis on as well.
The Ginger Ninja.
The Ginger Ninja. Everyone knows that.
That was a good enough
Oh,
intro.
yeah. Everyone knows that.
Yeah. Oh, that
guy. Duncan, that is awesome. How long have you been with the UFC? I know that you helped open the one in Shanghai, right? And then
so I was actually what I would call employee number one for the Performance Institute. I was the first person that the UFC hired. When I came for my interview here, it was a construction site. So that was back in 2017 when we opened the Performance Institute here in Las Vegas. And then, we had the pleasure of opening another facility in Shanghai in 2019 and then Mexico City in 2023. And then who knows what beyond that, so.
Wow, that's awesome. How did you get into this? Because we talked a little bit about your background earlier. You're working at Notre Dame. You've been in the U.S. for a while. Obviously, you're not native here. So how did you get to where you are now?
It's been a ride. It's been a trip. I've been blessed, but the abridged version is, I basically have been a strength and conditioning coach for about 25 years. In different areas. I did my PhD at the University of Connecticut back in 2004. Graduated, from a US big-time collegiate sports program, primarily in basketball, and then went back to the UK and kind of dropped into the English Olympic system as a strength and conditioning coach and a sports scientist. Worked in that kind of system for about 15 years, a couple of years in the English Premier League with soccer. But during my time at the English Institute, I primarily worked with a variety of different sports, but I kind of seemed to fall into working with combat sports. So whether it was boxing for the Beijing Olympic Games, that cycle, and then GB Taekwondo for the Rio cycle. So I kind of worked with combat athletes and combat sports, and as my career progressed, I also started taking on some leadership and managerial responsibilities. And then I always wanted to come back to the States. I had such a great experience in America, so. In 2016, I came back to University of Notre Dame and got the chance to kind of manage and coordinate some of the performance services across Notre Dame athletics. And at that point, when I was there for about 18 months, a recruiter came knocking on the door, said, "Hey, the UFC are kind of trying to do this cool thing. We know you've got combat experience. You've worked with combat athletes. You've also managed infrastructures and large teams. You might have the credentials for this job." And I was like, UFC, that's kind of just cage fighting, that I'm kind of set where I'm at, and I kind of dismissed it first of all, but they called back again, and I'm pleased they did. And I took a more of a serious look at it, and I was like, "Oh, holy cow, this looks kind of cool." Trying to move a sport that's quite young in its age, it's only 30 years old. So to kind of rewrite the structure and the strategy of what the sport's doing, to have a world-class facility to walk into on day one, and to be the guy that points it in the right direction and recruits the team and builds a strategy of what we're doing. It's I'm blessed in my approach right now, what I'm doing. So it's a great time.
It's really easy to forget that the UFC was just kind of this little thing that people looked at like cage fighting, because now it's this professional, very successful establishment. It's crazy how much it's grown, and you've kind of had a front seat to that.
Yeah, we do it a disservice by calling it cage fighting, but there's US ministerial people in the Senate and stuff. John McCain, I think, famously called it human cockfighting, but it's so much more than that. And what the UFC as a brand, and also other promotions outside of the UFC, what mixed martial arts has now become. It's the world's fastest growing sport. There's a lot of money and finance in the sport now, and these are truly world-class athletes that many other athletes aspire to look towards. And we have NBA players and NFL players and Olympians that everybody loves. UFC. It's a polarizing sport, but the brand of the UFC has really grown since the first UFC 1 in 1993. It's changed a bit since then. So yeah, it's great to be around. It's a really dynamic company, and what they made with this investment in the Performance Institute is an example of that. Just looking at how they diversify and all the different things that they can try and do to continue to grow the brand, obviously, of the UFC. But now we're really building infrastructure to support truly world-class athletes with the services and the support infrastructure that they are so due.
Mm-hmm. Do you give yourself enough credit for what you're doing?
I mean, I try to be a humble guy.
Yeah.
I'm a humble servant, but it's not just me. We've got an amazing team. I've got a great team of people around me, and each one of them is a superstar in what they're all doing. But I think what's core to what we're doing is like a belief in the mission.
Yeah.
We're here in Las Vegas, and this is a global sport. Like I say, we've got 670 fighters all over the world, right? So it's a bit of a decentralized model that we're working towards. So, it's about that ripple effect. How do we, implement things here and support fighters in Las Vegas that ultimately they take back to their gyms in Rio or Sao Paulo or, China or wherever it may be in Europe, and say, hey, I learned this, or they were doing this method at the Performance Institute. We should kind of think about it and how can we replicate that best practice? And I think that's what everyone buys into here. The whole team are really, they sacrifice, their time and their energy and their effort to be servants to these fighters. We all want them to succeed, every single one of them. And I think, we're all aligned to a really clear mission here. And that's what's fascinating, to be around a team where you're shoulder to shoulder with your teammates and we're all pulling in the same direction. It's great. It's a great environment.
Yeah.
It seems like you guys are really unified. I'm always really curious, obviously being with Luke and knowing, his interest in the American dream coming out here. What really brought you here? If not, obviously the UFC wasn't the pull. What was the reason that you decided to come to the US?
Yeah, I didn't go with the Welsh dream, that was for sure. No, I mean, listen, as a kid, growing up as a kid, I like everybody, I was always like very sporty and I played sport and, I went so far in terms of academy systems in the UK. And then, my professional potential ended, and I was like, I always wanted to be involved with sport. So how could I do that? I always wanted to chase gold medals, and I did that by, looking at the support side of things, like how can I be a sports scientist, a strength coach, whatever. And then when my buddies were kind of finishing university and were going on gap years to Bali or Thailand or whatever, and going doing crazy stuff. I was like, that sounds cool, like traveling the world, but, can I also figure out a way to combine it with continuing my career? So what I did was, instead of, going to full moon parties in Bali, I kind of went to, I started applying to universities in the States, because I think sport in America, just the popularity, the dedication, the resources, the money that's in sport, it's whatever the sport is, America usually embraces it pretty well, right? So to come to America and just see a different side of it was something that I really had a burning desire to do. And like I say, that was kind of when I finished my bachelor's degree in the UK. I kind of came over to the States and I started my PhD over here, and that was kind of my segue into America. So yeah, I love it. I love it out here. I love the opportunity in my professional career, all the diversity of what different people are doing and how they go about things. It's fascinating to see.
Were you surprised then, because you're saying you wanted to get that look at America, you came out here and came to Connecticut. Not no shade to Connecticut, but that's not normally the place. I'm like, yes, America, USA, that's Connecticut.
Yeah.
Chose the same weather, mate.
Uh-huh.
Went for the same weather.
Man, Connecticut's colder, isn't it? It gets pretty snowy, right?
Yeah. And fucking leaves. Like leaves
Yes.
everywhere. Everyone says like the New England fall is amazing. Yeah, it's stunning. But
nice.
then some bugger's got to pick all those leaves up.
Yes.
Right.
What about the snow though?
I'm mentally scarred from leaves. And we had more snow in the Midwest when I moved to Notre Dame than we did in Connecticut. But again, long winters for sure.
It's nice when it's coming down, and then you're like, oh, I gotta clean this up.
Yeah, I mean, like I say, lived in the woods, and I was like, at some point, all these leaves are gonna be on my driveway, and I'm gonna have
So that's
to.
why you moved to the desert.
Right? Yeah.
Fuck
just-
these leaves.
yeah.
I'm not
I
having
hate
that.
leaves.
So something that I asked you earlier, but also Maddy touched upon it. When you first came out here, or your goal was when you moved to America, did you ever see yourself doing the job that you're doing now? And do you ever look back on? I know, like everything for you is you're almost driving this whole thing forward for the future all the time. Do you ever give yourself the chance to look back and be like, well, I was living in England. I had a dream to come to America. Now I'm doing it for like one of the most well-known companies in sports in the world now.
Man, I'm tearing up. You're making me emotional.
Well, not just
I appreciate you saying that because I mean, I think in our world, in this type of world, you get carried along, right? It's a hamster wheel, and there's events every weekend, and it's easy to get caught up in it, and get stressed out, and I need to figure this out, or this problem's arise, or we've got more stuff to do. Like it kind of blurs your vision. But I think I do try to pause, and I do try to reflect and say, all right, pat on the back, like you're doing some good stuff, and people appreciate what you're doing, and I like I say, I get to do it with a world-class team around me. So, from a small town in North Yorkshire to Las Vegas, the entertainment and sports capital of the world, it's not a bad. It's not a bad gig, and I still drive down the strip and say, oh, "There's a Bellagio, holy shit!" Right?
Yeah.
What am I doing here? So it's it's really exciting to see, and that's the motivational driver, right?
Yeah.
What's the next thing? Where are we going next? How can we continue to evolve and develop? And I think that's what we're all trying to do, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And like we were talking about earlier, you were kind of this small town person and wanted to get into the supportive side of sports. Did you ever see yourself in this leadership kind of role, or has it the goal just to be, a coach?
That's a really good question. I'm sure there's lots of people kind of going to be listening to this that I can kind of give first-hand experience of. I'm very transparent, right? I'm a Brit. I'm pretty blunt, but I mean, I think I've come through my career as a coach. I was a strength and conditioning coach for 23 years with different sports. I've worked with over 40 different Olympic or professional sports at the highest level. It's been great to see all these different things. But I was always at the coalface. I was always the guy in the gym, kind of spitting sawdust. Let's get down to it. Let's figure out this injury. Whether it's how we're going to get you back to on the field of play. How we're going to progress you. You're trying to make the world champs. Like, let's get in the gym and let's figure out how I can complement what you're trying to do. As I've progressed in my career, which is the natural thing for anyone's career, you move into more positions of senior leadership and managerial and directorship, and it's like you kind of move away from what your MO is. Like my love was to the banter on the gym floor. There's nothing like it. And I don't really get that to the same extent now in a directorship position. When I first came here, that was pretty hard. It was a bit of a shock to me. It was a bit of a shock to say, holy cow, like actually I'm not the one having the chat on the floor. I've got great people to do that. But now instead of coaching the athletes, I'm almost coaching our staff and coaching our team of what we're doing. I'm playing puppet master in a bit of a different way. That was hard for me to begin with, but it's certainly settled now. Like I understand, I'm still contributing, but my contributions are very different. But on a personal level, I have to be very proactive about going down and get my fix. I've got to still be around it and still feel the granularity of like athletes training, the sweat, the smell, the feeling of, the chalk and all this type of stuff. I've got to throw, a few weights on the bar and load up a bar for people every now and again, just so I can feel like I'm contributing. But, it's a great question because definitely there's been this evolution of my career that's taken me away a little bit from why did I get into it in the first place?
Right.
Like why did I become a coach? because I want to coach people, I want to influence people, I want to support people and help direct them and educate them and, you know, be in the trenches together. And that's like a little bit distant from that now. So I've got to be proactive about getting my fix, but I also am very appreciative of my role in the bigger machine. And I think that's kind of how I comprehend it now.
It's one of those things you have to, you know, of course, respect that feeling of gratitude and need to be like, no, I'm in a good position. This is a good thing. I can't feel, you know, ungrateful for it, because I'm kind of in the same scenario, not at the same scale, but, you know, I've recently hired employees last year. I've coached them because I wanted to delegate responsibilities and, you know, grow them as coaches. And I've taken on less clients as a result. And it gets hard because you're like, well, you know, that's the thing that I do. That's
right.
the part that I love. So for you, you're saying that you go down to the gym and you work with some athletes. Is that something that you regularly do to kind of feel that need and that connection?
Yeah, I mean, I try to. Like I say, I've just repositioned my perspective on it. Like I'm coaching the coaches now, like, and that's no disrespect to my team. They're all great individuals on their own right. But my job now, rather than being very linear in strength and conditioning and physical training, now I've got to look on a much wider scale. When I'm in medical spaces, I'm in, you know, nutrition spaces. How does psychology? Yeah, I'm trying to mold this big machine. Just at a different level. So I'm still coaching, I'm just doing it in a different way. And I think that's the way I've tried to reposition my thoughts. And that's settled with me now. Like, actually, that's pretty cool, because whereas before I was very much on, you know, sets, reps, tempo, rest, recovery, now I'm talking about stuff over here, calories, macros. I'm talking about psychology and cognition and mindfulness. And I'm trying to say, well, how does this fit with this? And how does this fit with this? So my programming, whereas before it was like sets and reps, is actually now programming all the constituent pieces to optimize someone's performance. So I'm doing it in just a different way. And I think that's the way I look at it, which is now, that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool, because, you know, you're truly playing puppet master a little bit differently in terms of pulling and pushing all the pieces together, which for athlete X looks like this, and like, oh, we've got to change it for athlete Y because they need something completely different. So that's just been the evolution of my mindset. You know, I could sit and mill about and be, you know, annoyed that I'm not kind of on the gym floor. Yeah, I still go down and get involved with the guys and our strength staff every now and again, because that's kind of where I've come from. That's my background. But yeah, I enjoy and I love being around the medical team and the psychologists and the dietitians, because they're every day's a school day. Do you know what I mean? I'm learning on the fly as well, and I'm learning how all these different things kind of come together. So it's just a different perspective on it.
You were going to say another
Yeah,
one?
sorry. We kind of joked earlier about how, you know, a lot of American coaches, football coaches, have this like screaming and yelling kind of energy. Obviously, we know that that's not really your style. So what kind of energy or vibe of the environment do you promote for your coaches in the field?
Oh, don't get me wrong. Like, I can give someone a rocket up their ass if they need it, and I think there's a time and a place to do that. And listen, I'm not bashing any coaches. I'm not here to bash coaches, right? But I look at it this way, right? And this might be a bit of a long-winded. You might relate to this a little bit more, Luke. So, you know, I earned my profession and my career here in the States, and I'm very thankful for it. But it's also a different world. It's a different kind of environment in high-performance sport than it is in the UK. And I always say that we're all trying to get to performance optimization, but the US and Europe and potentially Australia a little bit have come at it a little bit different. Yeah. The USA has sports that are large number participation sports. So let's take football, right? There's, you know, we had 105 guys on the football team at Notre Dame, right? You got to get 105 guys through a workout in 2.5 hours, right? That's a logistical nightmare to try and deal with, right? So the only way to do that, to manage people and get them through it, is you have to be very organized, very structured, and everyone's got to know what's going on. Also, if someone gets injured or if there's an issue with an athlete, the next man up mentality is very clear, which, again, completely agree with. Like, everyone's got to be prepared on a team sport to contribute. You know, whether it's ice hockey, whether it's baseball, whether it's lacrosse. These are large participation sports. In the UK, it's a little bit different. We don't have the same talent pool, all right? We don't have the same amount of talent. So what we've developed on is, like, polishing our jewels and putting more emphasis on the 1 or 2 or 3, you know, athletes that are kind of going to drive that talent or drive that team forward. So mass participation, a little bit of a military influence as well in terms of physical training and organization, gives you this kind of authoritarian dictatorship kind of coaching approach in some parts, whereas we've come at it from a scientific, like, let's figure this out together with the athlete. Neither are wrong or right, and you've got to have a blend of both. But it just means that culturally, we're looking at it a little bit different. Do you know what I mean? So that's why I think sports science has been so influential in the UK, whereas the US is still trying to figure out what does sports science mean? Like, what is it to us? Whereas coaching, like I was one of the OGs in the UK as a strength coach, but that was like 15 years ago, right? Here, I mean, strength and conditioning coaches have been around for years and years and years, 30, 40 years, right? So this blend of the art of coaching and the science of coaching, we need the pendulum to stabilize in the middle rather than these large swings, but it just means we've come from different approaches, a different perspective. And that's how I look at it. So when you talk about whooping and hollering in the gym, like, everybody needs that. Like, you need it as a professional athlete. You need a kick up the ass sometimes, and someone's got to give that to you, right? Yeah. But it's just how you manage that. When do you introduce it? What purpose is it serving? And then another time, it's like, all right, Maddy, let's get down in the weeds on your sets and reps and the structure of your workouts, because that's the science of what we're trying to do. That's where we draw on the research and literature and say, well, we know how to build muscle. All right, let's get into some of the specifics, because if you just, all the time whooping and hollering, you might be missing the whole picture. So that's kind of how I just look at life as a foreigner here in the US, but earning my living in the US. Like, it's just different. It's just really different, and I think both of those approaches are valuable.
Yeah, I agree. It took a while for me to appreciate that side of things, where I'd look at the typical American strength coach. And I say strength coach rather than strength and conditioning.
Right.
Because a lot of them would be stuck in the gym, just doing the strength work, not really doing a lot in terms of like integrating with a sports coach and understanding energy system demands and doing conditioning, things like that. But then when I've actually been in the gym and seen how they work, and then, like you said, it's a logistical nightmare.
Yeah.
You have like 50, 60 guys at one time.
Yeah.
You have to be very autocratic to be like, right, we have 15 minutes for this, 15 minutes for the next thing. Go, 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 go. Whereas, like, exactly like you said.
And it's a self-perpetuating problem, and problem in inverted commas, right? Because it's not a problem, but, let's look at football. As a strength coach in the US, the highest place you're going to get paid is usually in the NFL, right? Or usually at big-time collegiate programs in the football sphere. But, obviously basketball is getting a lot of money, baseball, etc. But it means that most the whole industry, if you want to be a high-paid strength and conditioning coach, usually you're looking at football as an example. Well, that's just a self-perpetuating problem of like this authoritarian dictatorship kind of regime, which is not wrong or right. It's driven by logistics. Yeah, it's driven by the need to get your 80 players through a workout, and that's just the fact of it. There's no other way to do it. I haven't got a better solution, but it just drives this kind of inherent culture and ecosystem in football programs where you, number one, get paid a lot of money, and number two, you're having to manage all these people. That now filters down to the next young up and coming strength coach to say, I'd love to have a career in this area. Okay, well, how can I earn a lot of money? Well, all right, go work at an NFL team or a big time sport in college. All right, geez, okay, that's what it looks like. So it's just a bit different.
I think like the interesting thing as well is that the big four sports tend to be only played by American teams. Right. So there's not really anyone coming in that's going to drastically change anything.
Yeah.
Whereas like I feel like that's why in this here in UFC it's quite interesting that you're in this role, because you can really challenge your typical kind of American standard. And you know what I mean? Maybe there would have been an American in charge that drove it, and it would have been exactly like football.
Yeah, I mean, I think I spoke about kind of all the different sports I've worked with previously. Every sport's got a culture to it, right? Every sport has got a culture. And with culture comes dogmatic processes, like embedded systems and methods. And, in any sport, usually an athlete retires and becomes a coach, and you get this incestuous circle of rechurning the same shit over and over and over again. At some point, you got to kind of break the mold to advance a sport. Right now, you could say the NBA did that when they moved to like more 3-point shooting, right? So someone figured out, oh, this is a way more efficient way of winning that game. Same thing in strength and conditioning. Like if you want to change things, you've got to break a dogmatic system.
Yeah.
The beauty of MMA and what we're doing here is, it's multinational.
Yeah.
All right, it's number one. There's a massive cultural influence. So if we see a Chinese athlete, fighter come in, they're usually training very different to a way a Brazilian is, and what they do to a Polish guy that comes in, to a North American. So we have this melting pot of methodologies and systems which say, all right, well, I'll take a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of this, and we'll push all the good bits together and get rid of the crap, right?
Yeah.
So it means that, we are working in a sport that we can look at cultural influence rather than just like a North American, US influence.
Yeah.
We've also got a sport which is an individual sport, right? So an individual sport, our fighters are an N of one. Like they anything that success or failure is on them, right? And they're members of a team and they train with their teammates and stuff. But the success in the octagon, it's you and you. And so they're always looking for a competitive advantage. Like, how can I make sure I'm as prepared as well as I can be prepared to give me the best chance for success? That inherently drives innovation. Like looking at, nice work, buddy.
Sorry, man.
It inherently drives kind of a desire to change and pivot and flex and interrogate. Is there a better way of doing this? In some of the big four sports, like you say, like they were successful long before we arrived, and long after we're gone, and the system works, But I think, mixed martial arts and what we're doing here at the UFC, it lends itself to innovation and ideation and new ideas coming in and being accepted potentially a little bit more than breaking the mold of, baseball, the 1800s, right? Mm. Baseball, like they've been doing it since the 1800s. Holy shit. Like there's a lot of dogma in that sport. Not to say it's wrong, but like to change that and get them to do it differently is going to be very challenging just because there's a legacy to it. It's not necessarily the same in a sport that's only 30 years old.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, absolutely. With this, as new as it is, being able to create that culture, I think it was really interesting that you were saying, you have so many different athletes from different origins coming in here. How do you guys kind of approach that diversity and, push the UFC culture while still respecting everybody else's kind of approaches?
Yeah, you got to embrace it, right? If we have a guy or a girl that comes from, Dagestan, Russia, that the first thing you got to do is understand that there's going to be a cultural approach to why they're doing things. So we don't try and like eliminate that from the get-go and say, oh, it's the Performance Institute way, you've got to do it this way. No, we want to understand how each athlete is going about their preparation. And we're going to look at the pros and cons and try to just start to nudge it one way or the other. Like maximize what you're doing well, and let's just have a conversation about, is there a better way to do other things? But that's the beauty of this place, is that it's so multicultural. There's so many different ideas coming in that, on our floor out here, you'll have a Chinese fighter training and, the Russian will look over the cage and say, oh, what they're doing, I like that little drill, that kind of cool. Yeah. And then suddenly you see them and they're trying it. So there's this breeding and movement of ideas and approaches, which is inherent to the sport. But we always try to meet our athletes as the center of the conversation, right? It's about them. And what we do here at the Performance Institute, we're a support service, right? So we can tell them potentially an optimal or a more appropriate way to go about something, but it's on them. They can decide if they want to do it or not. And that's kind of, because we have they're independent contractors. They're kind of the CEO of their own company, It's not like the New York Yankees, whereas we're going to say, you do this and you have to do it because I own the rights to you as an athlete. It's a little bit different. And I think I kind of like that model as well. It gives you a little bit more conversational opportunity with an athlete, but ultimately it's their decision. Now, what we try to do is build that relationship and build that trust and build that evidence to say, okay, well, if you do what the Performance Institute team are potentially recommending or suggesting you to do, there might be a benefit. There might be a competitive advantage that if you pursue it in this direction rather than the way you've been doing it, our success rates show that it's an advantageous approach. So, it's a bit of back and forth. You can't just steamroller someone's pedigree and heritage of what they've been doing for years and years of training, and say, oh no, you're doing it all wrong. You need to change up and do it this way. So,
do you find that more so like the strength work, that combat athletes are a little bit more open to suggestions because maybe their training age is a little bit lower than like a football player that's been doing strength and conditioning since he was in high school? Or
That's a massive question, like great question, right? So we could be here all day talking about this. No, so first of all, it's like strength is not strength, right? So like I think just getting people to understand that like, CrossFit is not MMA strength training, which a lot of the guys will do. That style of like high volume, high intensity work, which has its place at a certain time, but does not have a place at another time. But you can't do the same thing over and over again and expect it to get different results. Like that's asinine, we know that. So I think this, MMA and combat sports are generally grounded in conditioning, all right? And you talked about, big S, little C before. Like these sports are primarily conditioning sports. We're not chasing large muscle mass like yourself, Maddy. We're not chasing like a...
Not me, mate.
We're not chasing hypertrophy to the same nature as you would with a rugby player.
Yeah.
In certain positions or with other sports. It's very much driven by conditioning. So then there is that educational piece. There's an immaturity around how you build out good strength training strategies. And like I say, strength is not strength, right? So when are you looking at high volume efforts? When are you looking at low volume efforts? When are you looking at force vectors and creating like biomechanical strategies that are a little bit unorthodox to your normal locomotive sports? Like combat is, and particularly MMA, sometimes you're lying on your back because, sometimes you guys are doing jiu-jitsu now. You're like what does that mean? Sometimes you're striking and you stand up, you're producing force off one leg, you're producing like reaching movements, you're trying to take an opponent down. Like it's all over the show, right? So just the educational need to continue to coach the athletes up on different systems and methodologies. I think that's something we do every week, and it's embedded in what we do because, again, it's just that educational piece to, is there a better way to do what you're currently doing?
Yeah. From my experience with combat athletes, I feel like the athlete themselves are really into what you want them to do. The other side is trying to speak to the sports coaches and have them like understand, you meet them in the middle where like what we're doing is not about making them really big and adding muscle, because I feel like that conversation normally tends to be, I don't want them to get too big, they'll get slow. And like you just said, it's not what that's not what we do as strength and conditioning coaches. So when you get the fighters that come into the PI and they have their coaches, do you have that conversation with the sports coaches and get them on board to what you're actually doing?
Yeah, wherever we can. I mean, I always say we want to influence the influencers. Yeah. Right. So, and again, it's an educational thing, right? It's a generational thing. We need to get through a generation of people coming through the sport, so that a young 15, 16-year-old starting mixed martial arts is now aware of a system that is a little different to the guy that's 50 years old and coaching right now, the way they did it when they were 15 years old, right? So we've got to get through a full generation to just embed new systems and new methodologies, and it's an educational piece. But yeah, wherever coach is around, we want to kind of have that conversation. Like I said, they were successful long before the Performance Institute was here. So we're not bold enough to say we changing the game, right? We're trying to support the game, right? Because they've been creating world champion fighters for a long time. So what are you doing right? What was so successful? Why are you creating this amazing talent? Okay. And then what we try to do is, okay, let's just interrogate what we know from training science. And can training science meet technical and tactical coaches at an interface where we're both comfortable with who's leading the dance? Ultimately, the technical coaches are always going to have the lead, but we're just trying to influence and shape better practice. That's what our mandate here is. How do we get this ripple effect from Las Vegas of best practice out across our global roster?
And then another thing that I think was really important is having them understand like their actual training load across the week and how we actually plan and implement that and focus on recovery, because there's been times in the past, in my experience, where I've gone, somebody's just done like a wrestling class that we had them for strength and conditioning, and I've gone, hey, you've got to go home now and like recover for the day.
Yeah.
And I look out the window, and they're doing like 10-mile run home. So
Well,
things like that.
I mean, yeah. First of all, no one likes wrestling practice, right? Like that's a given. Like wrestling is hard.
Yeah.
And what we've seen over the years is that, you know, athletes might duck out of wrestling practice and come say, oh, I'm doing strength and conditioning. It's not the same. And you ask a technical, tactical coach, and they'll say, get your ass in wrestling. Because that's the grind. That's where you really develop good conditioning and good strength levels for the sport of mixed martial arts. So if people are ducking out of wrestling, that's a problem. and we know that now. But yeah, I mean, I think I forget your question.
So, how do you?
Oh, training load.
Yeah, so training load to the fighter, and then also like the sports coach.
Yeah. So I mean, this is a sport which is probably overreaching. Is probably endemic, right? So everyone is overreached to some extent. That's a broad sweeping statement, right? But like, it's a sport that just breeds overreaching / overtraining, right? Yeah. Not everybody is like systematically overtrained, but a lot are overreached, i.e. they're fatigued, right? They're fatigued. And that's because, number one, it's the decathlon of combat, right? So they've got all these different training styles that you need to get into your training week. Managing that's right. hard. And number two, you've got a warrior spirit, right? Yeah. This is a fight. It's a fight sport. Yeah. So no one wants to take it easy and say, oh, well, I'll have an easy session today. No, people want to fight. Yeah. People are like genetically driven to be fighters, which means that when they do a training session, whether that's wrestling, striking, grappling, S&C, go for a run, whatever, they're trying to win the fight against the workout, right?
There's got to be that element of pain.
Yeah. So like that means that daily undulation or weekly undulation in a periodization strategy usually kind of is a little bit out the window. Yeah. All right. So here we are now. Oh, we know, we're the scientists. We know what to do. You've got to, have a deload week. All right. Well, what does that mean? Because a tactical coach, you're going, no. Like, what are you talking about? Like, they've got to go. So it's always this kind of relationship and this conversation about what's the best methods, and you have to endorse it with an insight and information and educational process. Mm-hmm. But yeah, training load in mixed martial arts is one of the critical things which an athlete needs to consider. And obviously a coach as well, like the technical coaches. We have to allow some overload. We've got to drive them into a hole. We've got to drive them down and put them in a hole so that they can rebound and recover. But as we all know, if you don't let that rebound happen, you're just in a hole. Yeah. And then you just got a tired athlete going into what I would say is the world's most demanding sporting arena of the octagon. I say, pretty fucked today. Well, go and fight this guy. This guy's trying to take your head off. Like, that's not what you want, right? You need to understand allow for regeneration and recovery. Now, what I will say, I'm talking a lot, but like I'll preface it with like this whole conversation, this whole paradigm of recovery is getting misinterpreted, right? Particularly in the States. People think like, well, I'd just sit down and just have a relax and chill out, right? You have to earn the recovery. You've got to do the work before you can do the recovery. Yeah. And at some points, I don't want you to recover. That's what we're trying to do. I don't want you to recover. Other times, I absolutely want you to be 100% recovered. But this paradigm of recovery is now getting interpreted by coaches as sports scientists or strength and conditioning coaches telling the technical coach, oh, your athlete needs to do less. Yeah. That's not what a technical coach ever wants to hear. Oh, your guy should do less, right? So we're now in this kind of conversation of like, how do we understand what recovery means and how do we implement it at the right time for the benefit of the athlete?
Yeah, that makes sense.
When you're talking about these different approaches, obviously as UFC combat sports professionally grows, you're getting more people that are experienced in that style of coaching. But as strength and conditioning coaches, yourself included, I'm sure you have a lot of people come in here that are used to coaching teams instead of this individual approach. Do you feel like there's a big learning curve in how these coaches kind of pivot to that like interpersonal role? Because that coaching is intrapersonal, like that fighter that's so important, especially mentally, and that's different than coaching a team sport. Do you feel like there is a lot of learning curves and things that they need to kind of reframe?
Yeah, I mean, number one, I always say we're not in a sports industry. We're in a people industry, right? And whether it's Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant or Tom Brady, whoever, you have to figure out that person to then even think about maxing them with sets, reps, drills, whatever. And I think that often gets overlooked in the younger strength and conditioning coach or the younger coach coming out of college, all the book smarts you want, but you got to connect with a person, right? You've got to get this guy to go into the gym to do wrestling practice or whatever it is that they don't want to do, and say this is the right approach for you, right? So like that's a skill, right? That, like you say, that's an interpersonal skill of communication and trust and relationship building, which you have to work on in this industry. The interesting thing about mixed martial arts is that this is a team sport, right? Most of these guys are in gyms. You were at ATT. You're like, that's a team, right? American Top Team, AKA, Kill Cliff Fight Team. Like this is a team of 60 people. Extreme Couture, Syndicate here in Vegas, whatever. There's 60 people on the mats, and those 60 people are essentially partners or supporting 2 or 3 fighters that are preparing for a fight. So. You can't just go into an empty gym and prepare for mixed martial arts, because I need an opponent. I need someone to give me looks. I need someone to drill me on what my opponent potentially is going to throw at me. So you're relying on your teammates. So a technical coach is driving a team practice, but trying to develop athletes on an individual level. That's a huge paradox. That's a huge paradox to try and figure out. So number one is, the technical tactical coaching is presented in a team environment. And then, on a strength and condition or physical preparation perspective, we tend to do that one-to-one or in small training groups where it's an athlete who's fighting with a training partner or 2 training partners. Very different. You've got to maximize both of those environments for the athlete. Like, how do they get the best out of being on a mat with 59 other people? Like, are they getting lost in the mix? Is their technical input being diluted because there's another 50 people on the mats? That's a problem you got to figure out. The same thing if you're only working with one athlete. How do you continue to drive the energy?
Right.
On a mat, they might be pulling the energy off those other 50 people that drag them along. If it's just you and the athlete, okay, we're in the gym together. This is cool. Kind of hang out. There needs to be that urgency. There needs to be that overload, that stressor. So both of those environments have got benefit, like pros and cons. And you rightly have pointed out, like, what do you do? Like, what's the difference? Like, they're very different. Well, yeah, they're fucking massively different. So you've got to have a different approach and be ready to flex your skill set as a coach to thrive in both of those environments. Not for you, but for the betterment of your athlete. That's what I always say.
From your approach as you're becoming like this leader of leaders, coaching coaches, is that something that's part of, kind of your continued education for your team of that personal experience?
Yeah, I mean, we try to obviously carve out time every week or every second week to have a whole team, professional development session. And that comes from external people, but also internally. Like, our new dietitians need to understand why our strength coaches are doing something. And our medical team needs to understand why our nutrition team are doing something or how they can help them. So we're always sharing and collaborating on, like, what can you do to help me with my services? And I always say, you should be going to work and, making someone else's life easier, not harder, right? That's what we do as a team. But we're always kind of sharing ideas and thoughts on, what's the best approach, what's the best way, and it comes back to the multicultural thing a lot in this space. How we connect with a Spanish-speaking athlete versus a Russian-speaking athlete versus a Mandarin-speaking athlete versus an English-speaking athlete. It's like totally different. At the end of the day, they've got to feel like they're at a place where they want to thrive and succeed. So we're always talking about, I had a conversation with this guy, or you did that weight cut with so-and-so 6 weeks ago. Like, what happened? What can you do? What's that team dynamic? Because I'm going to be working with them in Orlando next week, and I need to understand how that went. So we're always sharing not only, like, what's the best methodology, but what's this person like?
Right.
What's this girl or guy like? Like, where do they normally go to in their headspace on fight week? What are they expecting? So, yeah, we do a lot of that, and I think that's critical.
Yeah, that's so valuable. And you've talked about it before, how so much can go wrong if the team is not cohesive and not trying to collaborate. Because if one person's doing one thing with their training protocol, it could totally, minimize what the other coach is trying to do. Has that been difficult in the past as this has grown to get everybody on the same page of collaboration?
Yeah, I mean, when we opened in 2017, we had 8 staff members. Now we've got 26
Wow.
in Vegas alone. I've got another 21 in China. So it's great because we've got more intellectual property, and I would always, I would always prefer that. Like, bring ideas to the table. Like, I want as many ideas to create a melting pot of innovation. That's our job. But now you've got 26 people all going different directions, working with an athlete. Are they talking to each other? Does the athlete understand what the dietitian's doing versus what the strength coach is doing? Are the strength coach and the dietitian talking? Like, is everyone on the same page? It's kind of my job to try and facilitate that as, the VP of performance and essentially a performance director. But that can become very challenging, because if you think about all of the variables that go into just a week of training in camp for an athlete, whether that's doing your washing and taking your kids to school versus, all right, I've got to go to wrestling practice and I'm trying to do this striking session, and I'm going to be fighting a guy that's going to throw a bunch of leg kicks. I'm not good at checking leg kicks. All right, I've got to drill that. All the different variables. Oh, is my weight on point, or am I overweight? I need to now reduce my calories. Oh, who's doing my nutrition? Like, this whole snowballing effect. Like, it just becomes overwhelming. So that's what we try and do. We try and reduce the white noise as much as possible and let the athlete just focus on the things that they need to focus on. And we rely on our intellectual property and our expertise to drive the rest. And I think that's where we offer the best services, because we're pretty well connected, and we go the extra yard here within the PI to make sure that we're all connected, and we're talking about what the strategy for Maddy Forberg is. Like, what is she trying to do, which is different to Luke, because Luke's on a different schedule, a different team with different challenges. We've got a very customized and bespoke approach, but like, the management of that in our team is challenging.
You mentioned something about different languages.
Yeah.
How would you deal with that?
Oh, my Russian's amazing. No,
It's good.
Come on, Duncan, let's hear
What's your
it.
Portuguese like?
Yeah, no. Well, I'm pretty blessed. I have a Russian-speaking sports scientist. Right. I have a Portuguese former athlete that's now on our staff, Claudia Gladela. We've got a Spanish-speaking dietitian. So, I mean, it's actually critical. It's because it makes that experience for those athletes so much better if someone's speaking from their mother tongue. Mm-hmm. It's hard when you're using Google Translate to give someone a coaching session on making weight, because the complexity of their physiology and the process of making weight is pretty hard. So just being able to talk to them in their own language is huge.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not easy. It's not easy. And it's not easy from the most basic level of them walking through the door on day one and being greeted by a bunch of operational staff that only speak English. Yeah. It's like, I've heard about the Performance Institute. Where do I go? What am I supposed to be doing? Like, we've got to somehow titrate that down into their own understanding, so that then they can relax, and now they can start to understand what this whole machine is.
Yeah.
But language is probably one of the, behind geography, language is obviously
geography.
I mean, we're here in Las Vegas.
Yeah.
I've got athletes all over the world. How do I keep continuity of care for someone in New Zealand, or someone in China, or someone in Poland, or someone in the UK? Like, that's tough. Yeah. Remote coaching is really tough.
Yeah, time zones and making sure you're on top of stuff. Yeah, that was something I was going to bring up, was languages. So example that we always talk about was we had, like you said, we were talking earlier about ATT. Yeah. There was Brazilian guys there, but they were training with the Brazilian coach because they didn't want to train with us because we couldn't speak Portuguese. Yeah. So I learned like the most basic Portuguese I could. Yeah. And all of a sudden then, we were having them coming across and working with us. I think that makes a big difference. But
how easy is that?
Yeah, it's not that hard.
You don't get taught that in a book. No. It's like, we've got to make this person's experience enjoyable.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not enjoyable if you can't say hello in Chinese or Mandarin, or like push harder or whatever. So like, even in Mandarin, we've got coaches on the floor that can say a few basic words in Mandarin, and they're holy cow, okay, now they're saying hello to me. Now they're saying, how is your day? Goodbye.
It
You know,
means a lot more to
it
them.
means so much because now they're connected. And same in Russian and all this type of stuff. So yeah, you've got to. That's the art of coaching. That's where you're just looking at different ways to get little wins that is going to get an athlete more engaged. Because the best training program is the one that an athlete is most compliant to.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, and compliance, like you say, is like these Portuguese guys don't want to go and work with the Welsh guy over here because you can't understand what he's saying.
Not many people can.
You know.
You've been waiting all podcasts to get me something like that.
That's
You
funny.
behave in fairness. Before we jumped on, I think
We had a stern talking to with him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But no, you know what I'm saying.
No,
like,
I
it's
think- I
it's
agree.
critical. It's critical. It's client experience.
yeah, exactly.
That's at the heart
And
of it.
I think a lot of, well, not a lot, but I think coaches get so sucked into their sets and reps and what they know and what they do, and it's not really about you.
Yeah.
It's about like, how can I make this?
Yeah. And I'm not dogging anybody, right? I'm in this industry and I love this industry.
You can dog if you want.
Well, no, but like because people then hang me out to rise. Oh, Duncan French, this, that, and the other. But like, I'm sick of having the same conversations, like the same conversations over and over again. When it's like, guys, we know it. Like, we know that this is happening. Just implement it. Like, I don't want to go to a conference in 5 years' time and talk about how interpersonal skills is really important. Of course it's important.
Yeah.
We know it's important now. We know it was important 10 years ago. So why are we still having the conversation? Just start doing it.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that is where the strength and conditioning industry, particularly in sport, like it doesn't always move. Like it's like it just wants to sit in its own stupor and like complain about things that should be happening, and it doesn't always implement them really well. So it means that the industry moves in stops and starts. You know what I mean? It's like, well, shit, yeah, I've been having this conversation. No disrespect to you, but like we've had this conversation, 10 years ago.
Yeah,
but we're still having the conversation now.
Yeah.
So it's like, come on, guys.
Is that something that we talk about more in America though, or?
I'm not going to be that guy. But I think
questions.
I think there's just it's a bigger industry over here, right? So you're just talking about bigger numbers, more numbers, right? I think it's a much more finite group of people, and like we've just been talking about, right? For me to manage 8 people in 2017, that was fine and dandy. I could push them in a particular direction and get them moving. Now I've got 26. Well, that's a bigger conversation.
Yeah.
The industry in the UK is a lot smaller than America, the behemoth that is strength and conditioning, and the whole spectrum of strength and conditioning, not just like elite sport, whether it's a CrossFit coach or whether it's whatever you want to do. It's just a bigger machine to move, a bit like a bigger ship to steer. But I don't think it like embraces change very quickly like other industries.
Right.
Like if you're in mechanical engineering or IT and you come up with an app and there's a new widget for your app, like that's going to be implemented next week. Like because it doesn't stand still. Everyone's going to jump and say, "Hey, holy shit, this is amazing. Let's get on this." Boom, boom, boom. Next week it's implemented, and now everybody's going, "Oh, did you see that widget? That's going to change again." Like I say, strength and conditioning just wants to sit in its own kind of stuff, and it doesn't move very fast, and it just becomes frustrating when you're trying to, get people to be cutting edge and be innovative, and we're still talking about what I would consider basic stuff we were chatting about 5-10 years ago.
Yeah.
With that in mind, then, through trial and error of the institute in China and this one, and then the one that you said Mexico.
Yeah.
From your approach, what do you feel like, is really important that you change or alter moving forward that maybe you didn't consider in the past with these other 2 locations?
So, I always talk about hardware and software. So the hardware is obviously the facility, the environment, the technology, the resources, those types of things. I think that's always changing. I think we've got a pretty decent blueprint of what a world-class high-performance training environment for mixed martial arts looks like, or how it would function. So through our learnings here in Vegas and Shanghai and now into Mexico, like we've got a pretty solid blueprint of things that are really critical. We had a ton of equipment and stuff here in our first year, and we're like, sack that off. That like we don't need that at all. It's gathering dust. fighters don't need that, or coaches won't engage with that. So it's like, okay, well, that makes no sense in our world. So from a hardware perspective, you're just creating an environment where I think you're trying to drive subconscious behaviors. You're trying to drive interfaces between an athlete and coaches, or between the coaches themselves. And when I say coaches, I mean like the service providers. So like that's got to happen subconsciously. And the best training spaces do that. They don't say, oh, well, you've got to go get your post-workout shake. Okay, well, that's across the hallway, down the stairs, over the parking lot. It's like, holy shit, no one's going to go do that, right? So how do you drive an environment that's conducive at every level of the athlete journey? From when they come in to when they leave, how is it optimizing the experience? That's going to be different in China. It's going to be different in Mexico. It's going to be different in Vegas. Then you've got the software piece. Now the software piece is critical. That's kind of the cultural feel and the intellectual property that we implement something. Like if I put, if I didn't have, and this isn't like racist in any way, like if I didn't have noodles on the menu in China, like that's going to be a big problem, because culturally every meal is eaten with noodles, right? So what does that mean? What does that mean? We've got to create something which is culturally a great cultural fit, but now might present some dietary issues, for our dietitians with an athlete that's trying to make weight. If we look at Mexico, like what do they need to have a cultural feel? So, we're trying to put loads of street art and graffiti in this facility, because again, if you're in Mexico City, like you're just drawing on cultural things that say, I feel like I'm at home. I'm like, right, I'm not at home. What's this weird place? You want people to relax and engage in the environment. So it's a bit of a roundabout way of answering your question, Maddy. But every facility needs a consideration around hardware and software. And those, I can have an Apple Macintosh computer which looks stunning, all right? But without the operating system, it's just a doorstop.
Right.
All right? It's the operating system which makes it function really well. So yes, the facility, that needs to have a cultural feel, but the software, the people, the culture, the environment, the desire of an athlete to go and engage in that space is ultimately what makes it sing.
That was, obviously a really zoomed out question, but kind of zooming into you, Duncan, as a person. Do you watch all the fights? Do you feel like this is like on the weekends? Is this something you're invested in, or does it at a point feel like, well, that's my job, I gotta kind of leave my job at work?
No, I'm a fan.
Yeah?
Absolutely, I'm a fan. And I think it's you become even more vested in it when you're working with these people. When you see so and so, you've been working with them for the last 8 weeks, like they're fighting on Saturday night. It's hard not to be, more interested in the sport. But like the sport of mixed martial arts is just like it's a fascinating sport. All the different constituent parts to it, all the different components, the personalities. These are fighters, but they're honest as the day is long. There's definitely characters in this sport which draw you to it. You can name a few, but as a sport, I think it's a great spectacle. The other thing is it's easy to figure out, right? You could be a Martian and you can come down to earth and you could look at a fight and say, well, I think that person is winning, without even knowing any of the rules of what's trying to happen. But like, think about American football. Like, I'm still trying to explain American football to my mum. Do you know what I mean? Like this is what you do. There's 4 goes, and each go you can get 10 yards, you can get no yards, and like, oh my god, like she's like, what?
Yeah.
So like,
What makes you feel like you did a good job? Like you were successful day in and day out of what you're doing?
Yeah. So we don't get judged on wins and losses here, because we're agnostic to the whole roster. We work with the whole roster. So we could have, the main event on Saturday evening, and we could be working with both the people that are in the octagon. All right. And we've worked with this person for 12 weeks and this person with 8 weeks. We want them both to succeed. So for us, success is about engagement in our systems and our services. So we do a lot of assessment and monitoring of utilization, because we truly believe that people vote with their feet. And if they are here or interacting with the Performance Institute, we feel we can influence them and give them competitive advantage, or at least support them. When the octagon door closes, we sit back and we're casual fans as well. Just like, hey, we hope this is a great fight. All right, and when the octagon door opens, then we'll re-engage with them, say, do you need medical support? Did you get knocked out? What's going on? How's your knee? How's your shoulder? Boom, boom, boom. And then on to the next fight. So it is an interesting dynamic, because usually in elite sport, you're like, oh, well, I want my guy to win. You know, I want my girl to win. But that's not the same here, because I want everyone to succeed. So, yeah, we're evaluated on engagement. We're evaluated on, return to play, how we expedite someone's health and return to the octagon if they've been injured. We get evaluated on, weight-making activities and how we can, support all the weight-making activities for the fighters, which is a very stressful and challenging process. And again, it's a lot of it is customer feedback and customer evaluation. When I say customers, I'm on about the fighters,
I talk with my coaches and clients a lot about creating metrics for success, because like you said, it's not always about winning or losing. It's about everything, that you've defined as success leading up to it. But for you, from a singular standpoint, just Duncan, what makes you feel like proud of like you did a good job, that you were successful in your role?
Yeah, I mean, number one, I want my team to feel like they're empowered. Again, just in the position that I'm in, my job is to set other people up for success. Right. So I have to create a infrastructure and a system and an environment that allows my head of sports science to do an amazing job with this athlete, for my strength coach to do an amazing job with this athlete. That's what I've got to do. I've got to empower a highly intellectual individual that can have a great impact on an athlete, the freedom and the creativity and the space to operate and do what they do, and why they come to work. So that's empowering for me when when my team are functioning really well, when the whole staff is kind of doing great work to help the athletes. That's something that makes me very proud. But when I see certain scenarios and situations where there's been a very challenging process, whether that's making weight or that's an athlete that's been injured or whatever, and you can see that the whole team is dedicated their efforts and their time to get that athlete to an outcome that we all desired. Again, that's another thing which is hugely rewarding. It means that the system's working, the system's designed a particular way, and actually it's coming to fruition. So those are the things that I kind of get, I kind of say, oh, that's pretty cool. That's why I do my job every single day is, one, seeing our team succeed and seeing them kind of engaged and motivated and committed, seeing them want to change a sporting culture and have that ripple effect, over the years of how people do things. And then, yeah, looking at how we affect the athletes and the athletes saying, good job. You really helped us. It's we're here as a service infrastructure, and it's about those guys, not about us.
I'm glad you say that, because it is important to have, especially as you become the coach of coaches and less hands-on with individual athletes, because you have to fulfill that need for success, or that you're doing a good job no matter what your role is. And as coaches, we're so predisposed to that outcome based, and having a team underneath you, you kind of have to switch what success means, even for you and for the team as well.
Comes back to the question you asked me earlier about being a coach versus being a director. It's just a different mindset, and it's taken me a little bit of time to get the mental maturity to kind of just look at it through a different lens and a different optic, and I think that's important. But again, I'm not the guy. I'm one of the guys and girls that makes this whole thing run, and I just try and keep my sphere of influence in perspective. I've been doing this a long time. I think I'm pretty good at what I do. I try to, support and influence others, but at the same time, it's not all about me. The power is it's the church is not the building. The church is the people, and I'm a huge believer in teamship.
As you were saying about creating that team, from someone that was a coach, what kind of things go into creating these leaders? Like, what are some important, kind of pillars of leadership that you distribute amongst your team?
Yeah, and that comes back to kind of the coaching kind of discussion we had. There's different ways to lead. Number one, I'm a huge believer in, like I say, subconscious awareness, right? So if if I'm directing people and telling them what to do and I'm not exemplifying the same high performance behaviors, that's going to be challenging for people. So first and foremost, leading by example it's a non-negotiable in a position of leadership. You can't be sitting on your ass and doing nothing and expecting everyone else to run around like blue ass flies and do all the work. That's just not going to go down well. So however you do it, whether you're in the mixer and doing the work or you're perceived to be, supporting the whole machine moving forwards, I think, demonstrating your commitment and your dedication is huge, because your teammates are expecting you to pull, the oar, the same strength that they're pulling the oars. Do you know what I mean? And if you're not, that's going to be a problem for anybody. That's human nature, right? So I think, leadership starts with demonstrating your commitment to the cause. And then I think it comes down to great communication skills. Like I say, you don't have to be loud and always energetic. You can be quiet and just be you can say one word and like make the room go silent. You know what I mean? Just out of awe. Like it's timing and it's communication skills and all this type of stuff. But you've got to be a great communicator as a leader. You've got to, you have to let people that you're influencing in your sphere of influence understand where you're trying to go and why they're trying to follow you. Do you know what I mean? So these are basic leadership skills. But yeah, leading by example, great communication skills, passionate, energetic, dedicated. All these types of things. But I also want someone that's like creative thinking. Like I want problem solvers. And I think, problem solving expertise is something that I put a lot of cachet on. In this world of high performance sport and particularly mixed martial arts, you're going to come up against issues and problems like, how do I connect with a Brazilian guy? Well, speak a few Portuguese words, right? Like, that's a problem-solving exercise. Some of them are very remedial and small in nature, but some problems are big. But all the time, what I try and promote with my staff is like every performance situation is a problem-solving activity, and the more tools and more creativity that you have to solve those problems, the better leader, the better kind of teammate you're going to be. So, the best leaders are also the best problem solvers.
I think something that you said earlier would go in there really well was empowerment. I think a lot of people will feel better about their job role if their boss was giving them the opportunity to express themselves. Because obviously you don't want all the coaches to be exactly the same as you.
Yeah.
So empowering them, I feel, gives them the opportunity to be a different type of person.
Yeah.
And then do you think that as a whole then, if you have a different type of person, that like combination of personalities and ideas is a bit more positive rather than everyone just being like yes and agreeing? And
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've got a Russian sports scientist. You think like, he's bringing a lot of different perspective in life to the table for conversation. Like diversity and inclusion of thought and is huge. And I embrace that. I want a really diverse group of thinkers, not only culturally and socially, but like the way they think. I always say that you want motivated staff. Like everyone works hard, right? Like I don't care what your job is, most people should work hard, right? So that's a given in this world of elite sport and high performance sport. Like if you're not working hard, like that's an issue, right? So let's say everyone's working hard. Like how do they keep you motivated? Well, for me, it's three things. Number one, you've got to have a voice. Right, you have to be able to feel like you've got a soapbox to be able to at least share your opinion, give your thoughts, right? And that's all anybody wants, like have a voice. That's critical. So I try and give all my staff a voice. In our team meetings, every single person on the team has a chance to talk, right? We go around the whole team. Everyone needs to feel like they can influence the outcome of something, all right? So they're not just spinning their wheels. Again, like spinning your wheels is a huge motivational hit, right? You want to feel like I know where I'm trying to get to, and what I'm doing is contributing to that end point. So the people need a voice. They need to feel like they can influence the outcome of something. And then they also need to feel like they've got ownership and responsibility of something. And again, once I own whatever it may be, like then I'm ordering the peanuts for the fueling station. Fuck, yeah, all right, I've got a responsibility. Like, it just means you're part of the machine, you're part of the process.
Yeah.
So those three things for me are critical in terms of just generic topics for having a voice, being able to influence the outcome, and ownership of something within the system are huge motivational drivers that keep a team moving forwards. And you have to go out your way to figure out, if you're in a position of leadership, what that is for each of your reports.
Yeah.
So that everybody on the team, from the most junior staff member to the most high-class performer, feels each of those three things.
Have you ever had any interest in doing like jujitsu or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, I play. Yeah, I've done jiu-jitsu, so I'm blue belt with Hector Vasquez and the Cabrini system. I messed up my neck a little while ago, so I've dialed it back a little bit. But yeah, I mean, I think when you're a strength coach, you also need to try and get some, like, I'm not an MMA fighter. I don't know I'm not an MMA fighter, but I need to try and get some awareness of what these guys go through to at least be able to relate, because otherwise you're having a conversation that there's going to be no connectivity. So, there's a respect thing from athletes that see you going on the mats and getting thrown around, right? So yeah, that, whether it's boxing or kickboxing or jiu-jitsu, I feel like you have to, whatever the sport is.
Yeah, of course. Oh, that's funny. It's funny to think about you doing a kickboxing.
I mean, I've got short legs and tight hips from playing soccer all the time, so I'm not the best kickboxer. I'm not best at throwing a triangle either, because I can't.
Oh, mate, don't talk to me about triangles.
My hips don't move.
No,
so, yeah.
I can't.
No.
You struggle.
No, my hamstrings are too big. I was curious though, because you obviously see so many people that come in here that are successful, whether that be, fighters or members of your staff. Do you see any similarity amongst, whether that's personality traits or work ethics in particular that make them the successful person that they are here?
Yeah. The best people, or whatever it may be, what they do, particularly fighters, there's two things. Well, it's compliance, right? It's dedication to the craft. They are, every single day, whether it's an up day or a down day, they're compliant, they execute on what they're doing. So, the best people just live it and breathe it, and that's really important for them. Rather than tired, sore, whatever. Like, no, they'll do something. They'll keep compliant to the journey. They embrace the journey, and I think being jiu-jitsu players now, you'll probably relate to that. Like, jiu-jitsu is probably one of the most frustrating sports, because one day you can go in the gym and you feel like you're $1 million and you're choking everyone out. The next day you're coming back and it's like, holy cow, like, I don't even know what I'm doing. It's like the first day I stepped on the mats.
Yes.
Like, it's a great equalizer. But embracing that grind and embracing that journey, I think, is what makes jiu-jitsu, potentially of any sport, like, so liberating when you get there and you feel, all right, now it's sticky and now I can do it all the time. I can execute this movement. But yeah, the best staff are completely dedicated. The best athletes are dedicated, and they're on this journey. It's not about the end point. It's about the process, the believers in the process. And then second to that is kind of, they always execute skill acquisition at the highest level. Like, there's an intentional skill acquisition. So whether that's learning, new science or new training information or whatever, or whether it's like striking, jiu-jitsu, wrestling, whatever, they are executing skill acquisition at the highest level and engaged in that skill acquisition process, rather than just kind of going through the motions. So if you look at the top guys in the world, whilst fatigue is getting embedded across the week or across the month, they engage in recovery activities, or they may do things that they can come back tomorrow and get back on the mats and be engaged in skill acquisition to the highest level. So their skills just develop faster or better than everybody else, whereas other people are potentially fatiguing, and therefore their skill engagement and skill acquisition is not as good. So, like I say, it's embracing the journey and the process, and then it's intentional skill acquisition, whatever skill acquisition is for you.
Did you have anything else that you wanted to ask Duncan?
Oh, I got loads to ask him, but I don't think we have the time. Really.
I could talk with you all day, Duncan, but thank you so much for being here. I'm obviously going to put your Instagram page in the information, but is there anywhere else that people can connect with you? Do you do any seminars or anything like that people can?
Yeah, no, I need to do more, but UFC keeps me busy. No, I'm obviously, you can get hold of me on most social channels. I'm Duncan_French, I think, on most things. And yeah, I try to do different workshops and seminars and speaking engagements with different associations. Usually it's through different professional associations, whether that's, National Strength and Conditioning Association or whatever it may be here in the States. So, yeah, look out for me at a street corner in the not too distant future.
Where can I listen to your DJ stuff?
Oh, yeah, DJ stuff?
DJ Tiny Wiener.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for your time here, Duncan. This was great. We could talk
Thanks,
for hours.
guys. Appreciate you.
Thanks, guys, for listening.